Welcome to the 8th Time for a Pint Virtual Get Together. I am Chris Mann. I'm joined by my wonderful co-host Matt. Hello, Matt.
Morning.
Would you like to introduce one of our guests?
I would. I'm very pleased to be able to welcome Ming Thein from Ming Watches, all the way from Malaysia.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you for staying up. It's much appreciated.
No, that's fine.
And I'd like to welcome along Nicholas Bowman-Scargill, and I'm going to get this right, the 4th Managing Director and refounder of Fears Watches. I've written that down enough times, I shouldn't get it wrong.
You'd be amazed how many people still get it wrong and start, adding many years to my age by calling me the 3rd. But no, it's lovely to be with you this afternoon.
Fantastic to see you all, and thank you to everybody that's joining us live. As you probably know if you've been before, but you may have forgotten, it's been a couple of weeks. It's a chat function where we've all been able to see you saying nice things and good afternoon and talking about pens. That is the place to chat amongst yourselves. You can send stuff to us. It's quite hard for us to keep track of it because there's so many of you. There's also a Q&A function. The Q&A function lets you actually ask us a question. So the way we're going to do this is we go around the room. We've each brought a watch along. We'll talk a bit about the watch. We might each ask each other questions about the watch. You can join in too. So please use the Q&A function. Matt's going to be keeping an eye on that. I'm going to be running a screen share and recording things. And speaking of that, let's get on to the first watch. So Nicholas gets to go first. So here we go. Just let me know when you would like me to proceed, sir.
Right. Okay. So thank you, everyone. So for anyone who follows my personal Instagram, you'll have seen for the last week or so, I've been teasing a new watch that I've added to my personal collection. Some of you may know that I sold all of my watches, my Rolexes and Omegas, to fund the restart of Fears watches about 4 or 5 years ago. And so the fact that I'm slowly building my collection up is very exciting for me. And I'd say this is this is certainly the fanciest non-Fears watch in my collection. The other one is a Seagull chronograph. So this is a little step up above. But yeah, I can reveal this afternoon my new watch is made by fellow British watch company Garrick, who are based up in Norwich, up in Norfolk. And this is a watch that I commissioned. It's for those who know Garrick, they'll know that they make a lot of bespoke watches. They very rarely keep stock of anything, which allows for great customization. And I placed my order for my Garrick in December 2018, so over a year ago. And then through some of these slides I'm going to show you, you'll explain why it's taken over a year, because I'm quite a picky customer and I've kept changing the specification of the watch, most recently around December 2019. And then in the end, they were like, we just need to build this and send it to you. So you're in lockdown, you can't make any more changes. So here it is. So Chris, if we have the first slide. So this isn't my watch. This is the Garrick Norfolk, and this was launched in, I believe, 2015. And I remember when this came out, it was while I was still working at Rolex, and I just fell in love with it. It's white enamel dial, it's British made steel case, and then the thermally blued hands, which I had never seen this shape before. And Garrick they often name their watches after maritime themed endeavors. And I just love these anchor hands. And I just thought this was such an unusual dial layout, such an unusual watch. So in December 2018, I was lucky enough to have a bit of money around. So I said, right, I'm going to order one of these. And then I didn't. So Chris, go on to the next slide. This is very close to what I ended up going for. Anyone who attended the Watchmakers Club last November in London, if they went to the Garrick stand, they would have seen this, which was a prototype. And they'd made this just for the evening as a one-off, and it was made relatively last minute. And I saw this and just fell in love with it and realized that it was based on the Norfolk. And they were kind of getting ideas of whether this might be the new replacement Norfolk. You know, the watch had been around for, at that point, 4 or 5 years. So they were getting ready to retire it. And so they did this as a one-off just to see what people thought of it. And I was by far the most vocal one of saying how much I loved it, especially because it's got the same layout as the previous model. However, if we go on to the next image, a lot of it references this watch. So let me just tell you a bit about this watch. This watch is incredibly special. This is called the Garrick S2. And this was launched this would have been launched at the end of 2018. And again, it has a case which is made in Britain. They do all the finishing in-house. The dial on this is phenomenal. This is an engine turn dial that they make in their own workshop in Norfolk. And I've seen the machines which make this. Each dial just takes an outrageous amount of time to do. You know, anyone who's ever seen sort of, you know, Rose engine turning, and, you know, it's ridiculous. It's just, and if you look at all the little curves, if one of those goes wrong, you have to discard the whole dial. So, you know, you can be spending a whole day making one dial and then it goes wrong. What I particularly loved on this was the chapter ring. If you look at those numerals, you'll see it's a lovely set of Roman numerals, but all joined up on the same ring. And that is actually applied on. So that is actually screwed on with tiny little screws, but that is made out of one piece of steel that's laser cut, hand finished, and then firmly blued. And for anyone here who's ever attempted to firmly blue anything, it's one thing doing hands. You try doing a chapter ring like that. It is so difficult because you're constantly trying to get the whole thing at the same temperature. And I just thought that was phenomenally beautiful. So when I saw the prototype, which was the image before, I said, right, I need this on my watch. So we ended up creating a one-off, a piece unique. And even though Garrick did tell me today that when I showed the watch, if anyone wanted one, they would make a second one for them. So maybe a piece by unique. If we go on to the next image, you can see my watch itself. So this is my personal Garrick Norfolk. And
That's lovely.
Thank you. Thank you. I can't say just how much I'm in love with this watch. I mean, most days I'm wearing one of my own watches, either from my personal collection or one of the ones I'm, you know, from our showroom. But this watch, I've just fallen in love with it, head over heels. So there's a couple of things I want to point out on this. The first one is the case. If you see, in particular, the lugs and the shape of the bezel, this is the case from their more upmarket range, the Portsmouth, the S2. So it's the same case as the previous watch, which is a much more complex case. I mean, the days it takes polishing just one case is ridiculous. And amazingly, for a watch that's 42 millimeters, it sits on the watch much more like a 40 mil. It's a very clever case design. And for anyone who has met me in person, you'll know how tiny my little wrists are. And I'm a massive advocate of watches being very slim and 38 millimeters. But there's something about this. It's much larger, obviously, than most watches I wear, but it really has something special on the wrist. So it's got a beautiful curve to the lug and the finishing. And as you can see, the blued hands and the blued chapter ring and nothing else. And there's a reason for that. If we go on to the next image, please. So I have for many years said that the sign of a really good watch is one where if you remove the logo, you still instantly know what it is. So obviously, you know, start off with, you know a Datejust is a Rolex because of the fluted bezel, because of the proportions, the bracelet. You know, one of my favorite watch brands of all time, Laurent Ferrier, you know, because of the shape of the case, but also the hands and the battens. Ming, your watches, you know, if you didn't have any name on the dial, they are instantly recognizable as your watches. And that's what's lovely to see across the collection.
We try very hard to hide the name, actually.
Well, the first thing I do when I see one of your new releases is it's almost like, where's Wally? Like, where is the logo?
Yeah.
Let's have a look for it. But and so
Yeah, thank you.
for me, I always like that, and that's why I strive to do with my own watches. But with Garrick, because of this unique shape of hand, I've always said to them, you know, oh, it'd be lovely to see you do a watch one day that had no logo on the dial. And so when it came to this, they said, well, where, you know, do you want us to put our name on it? And I said, no. I said, it doesn't need it. You know, it's not like we're going for some sort of Kickstarter minimalist Scandi inspired look. Not at all. Like, this is, you know, this is a completely different style. But I said, I just don't see where the name will sit comfortably. I feel like it would distract from the beauty, which is that chapter ring. And if we actually go back an image, sorry, Chris, if we can go back one. So, sorry, that's the one, perfect. So if you see the sub-seconds, that is part of the main chapter ring. That's not a second part that's then soldered on. That is all cut as one entire ring and then all firmly blued. And then when they attach it, this was something that they found with the prototype, was originally it was riveted on. And the problem is when you put the rivet at 9 o'clock, if you can imagine, you're putting the rivet here and everything is coming around it, and it basically pushed the chapter ring, the sub-seconds up slightly at its furthest point. So for mine, what they actually did, and if we go forward 2 images, one more, I think. Yes, on here, you might be able to see at 6 o'clock, there are actually 4 tiny little screws that hold the chapter ring in place. So they're at 12, 3, 6, and 9. And by doing the screws, you can obviously, it's much better for adjusting the height. And as you put it all down flat onto the dial, of which it's an enamel dial. But even things like the cap on the center of the sub-seconds hand and the cap on the center of the minute and hour hand, those are made bespoke in-house to fit onto the hand. So each cap takes about 2 to 3 hours to turn on a lathe to go on that set. So everything on this watch is bespoke to it. There is no standardized parts, even with the case, with each case being finished, you know, the bezel and the case back screw onto the case middle. You know, if, and fingers crossed I don't do this, but if I bashed it and needed a new bezel, they'll have to take a raw bezel, refinish it, and then screw it onto the watch. You can't just have standard parts. If we go back one image, Chris, you can have a look at the movement. So the movement on the Garrick is a ETA 6497 or a Unitas 6497. And when it came to discussing the finishing, because effectively they say, well, we can do anything you want. And I quite like the angular lines on the Unitas, and you can see it's got a beveled edge on there. And I also wanted to go with quite a British sort of frosted look to it. I didn't want any Côte de Genève or any other sort of more exotic finishing. I wanted something quite austere, but then rose gold or pink gold plated, just to give it that warmth. And as a little surprise, and something I wasn't expecting, was when it arrived, it had the swan neck regulator, which I just absolutely love. And for anyone who knows this movement well or owns a watch which is powered by one of these Unitases, it was designed for a pocket watch originally, which is hence its size and also the positioning of the small seconds. So on my one originally, it would have had a winding crown at the top of the pocket watch and then the small seconds at 6 o'clock. But one of the things that's so lovely about it is it's a slower beating movement. And when you hear it, it's just got a lovely sort of, and it's got a huge balance, which, you know, you can almost feel the watch moving around on your wrist. It's just got such a lovely sort of dum, 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 dum as it's ticking away. And it's certainly, if you put it on, say, a wooden table or something, you can really hear it. And it's such a beautiful sound, because so often we're used to something beating at, you know, 28,800, and that has such a fast, like da 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 da, and this has just got such an elegant kind of calming beat to it. And then when you wind it, such a satisfying click. Just the manual winding, it feels like old pocket watches did. It has that real turn to it. If we can go on to the next slide, please, Chris. So, I mean, this photo I haven't got any photo that really puts it in full proportion to my wrist, but 42 millimeters is a large watch, certainly by my standards. But on the bezel, can you see how the bezel is set back from the case edge slightly? And what that does is it creates a wonderful optical illusion when you look down on it. It's a bit like looking at a Seiko or a Grand Seiko. When you look down, the bezel doesn't just hit the edge of the case and then drop away. It's actually got stepping, which means that, a 40 mil Grand Seiko wears more like a 38 mil. It's just a very clever optical illusion of helping to shrink the size of the watch when it's on the wrist. And I have to say, it's not the thinnest watch in the world, but there is something very nice about how it sits on the wrist. I think sometimes if you love smaller watches, it can be quite fun to have something bigger, which isn't a large sports watch or, a diving watch or a tool watch. For me, this is sort of the dressiest watch in my collection, and yet it's the biggest and thickest. So yeah, go ahead.
Can I just interrupt while we're on this photo? Chris in Canada has asked about the crown, said it looks quite sharp. Are those ridges quite sharp, or is it just the way it's?
No, so yes, they certainly do look sharp. And I mean, these photos are from the day I took delivery of the watch. So at this point, it had only been wound up a handful of times for testing. Now with them, they're not that sharp, but as you can imagine, they're quite deep veins. So the more you handle them, the more sort of, to be honest, the grease and dirt from your fingers get onto the crown. And it makes it slightly less shiny. No, they're not actually too sharp. However,
no, they've just got nice bevels cut into them.
Exactly, but it really helps for getting a good grip when because it's a manual watch. It obviously needs I'm winding it all the time. So yes, this is my my beautiful new Garrick, which I absolutely adore.
It's stunning. I've been staring at these pictures for the last 2 weeks. It is really, really lovely.
So a couple of questions. In fact, let's just get the statements out of the way first. Just about everyone who's typed in has said it looks absolutely fabulous, very nautical, very English, very British, and they love it. So awesome. Chris Andrews asks if you think this piece, or rather with this piece, you've reached kind of watch nirvana and can stop collecting now.
I recently heard from someone a wonderful phrase called the sort of exit watch, the watch that isn't necessarily your grail, but it's the watch that means you stop collecting. You've now got your watch. I would say with this piece, it almost could be for, when I say sort of independent watchmaking, this is handcrafted. This is, bespoke, it's hand finishing, it's as traditional as it comes. I'll be honest, the only other watch, or the only space for another watch in my collection, of which there is one space in my watch box, and something I am saving up for. I would love a watch from a brand, say like Vacheron, and that is partly for the amazing watchmaking, but I'll be frank, also partly for the brand, partly for owning a big name brand. And for me, I do feel like this watch probably is the pinnacle and where I feel really happy in terms of owning an incredible independent handmade watch. But I do think there is still a space for me because, I love watches, I love watch brands, I love watch heritage. I think there is a space certainly for something from a bigger, more well-known brand. And I think that's probably largely from that, because to be able to buy a watch like that brand new, I would need to be, have reached a certain levels of success in my business. And so it'd be a kind of, I own one of these. And I know that sounds slightly sort of flash and slightly sort of shallow, but actually I'm aware that that can be the power of brand, so that's probably a complex answer to what was meant to be a very simple question.
If I can just jump in there, I could suggest you buy another watch box. That's always the easy solution to these things.
No, that's true. That's true. I think though, I'm very much the sort of person who I'll happily advocate people owning many, many, many watches. For me, though, I'm very, very sentimental. I'm a complete old romantic, and I love owning very few items so that I build up a huge amount of emotional connection through, I wore this watch when I did X, Y, and Z, or, and also I'm, I think there will be a huge limit to my husband's patience if I traded in my watch box. I think he'd be going, no. I know what's going to happen now.
Cool. Any more questions, Matt, or is everyone just bowled over by this?
Yeah, Kathleen says it's stunning and very well suited to your style, Nicholas. So, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, this is always the difficult thing. If someone says to you, right, well, we're making this bespoke, it's for you. What do you want? And the problem is, it's a bit like if you get a tailored suit or a tailored shirt. And I've learned this over the years of being lucky enough to own quite a few pieces which are tailor-made. It's very tempting to go, oh, let's go for all the bells and whistles. Let's go for all the colored linings and the stitchings and all this. But actually, my tailored suits are navy blue and dark gray because you can wear them every day and they just look classic. And I think the same with this, the temptation is to suddenly go for all the colors. And, we even started going down the line of, should we do something other than white? And in the end, I was like, no, white enamel, thermal blue to that shade of blue. I didn't want the purpley blue. I wanted the blue. Actually, yeah, it's quite difficult to stop yourself getting carried away and just go, no, we'll keep it at this.
I think you did well, and dropping the logo off it is quite a brave move as well by both you and Garrick, I think. But there we are.
Yeah.
Good.
Cool. Shall we move on to the next watch? Everyone happy? Good? Comfortable? Good. Got beers? Wonderful. So next up is Ming's watch, which is another thing that I've been staring at for the last 2 weeks. Take it away.
I have to apologize because it's another blue one. Actually, I didn't realize that we'd be going down the steel watch with blue details route this week. But here we are. This piece is one that has a little bit of history for me because I actually came across it very early on in my collecting journey in the I would say the early 2000s, around 2001. So if we can have the first slide, please, Chris. At the time I was a student and I looked and went, it's very much both emblematic of what you think of when you think JLC. It's a Reverso. It's a classical size. It's one that doesn't have anything on the back, so it's in its purest execution in the sense that you flip it over and either you have your own personal engraving or it protects the face of the watch. But basically, it was in a configuration that I hadn't seen before, certainly, and it turns out that these things are pretty rare. I think they made a couple of hundred in 2 different sizes, in the Classique and the Grand Tire size, with blue dial and silver tracks, which is the version I've got, and a silver dial with it's a white dial actually with blue details. And I was attracted to the blue one for I think obvious reasons. It's I think the only one that Jaeger has done with a guilloche that's actually metallic as opposed to lacquered. So you get some very nice details in this. I mean, you've got a range of finishes on the dial. You've got a very sort of subtle matte on the outer chapter. You've got the metallic silver that plays off against the metallic guilloche blue, and then you've got metallic guilloche silver again within the sub-secondary. But I mean, to cut a very long story short, I mean, this is a watch that it's one of those that got away from me, and it turns out that I would get a second chance at this sometime later on. Much later on, actually, 2012, when just after I'd switched out of corporate and started full-time photography. So at that point, I was in Switzerland on a trip, which was my first commissioned photo shoot, actually, for a watch brand. And during that trip, I actually paid a visit to the manufacturer at Jaeger and asked them, by any chance, do you have one of these sitting in the archive? Because I would like to buy one. And they said, actually, we don't have any. We don't even have a prototype yet, and we're not even sure why. So the person I was talking to was a little bit confused by that. And then we landed up talking to the the design head at the time. His name was Unek Delowitz, I think. I can't quite pronounce it properly, but he also said we didn't have one. So, funnily enough, though, on the way out of Geneva, if you can have the next slide, on the way out of Geneva, I actually managed to find one of these things, of all places, at the airport watch shop, hidden in the bargain corner, which is hidden behind a pillar. Turns out it was new. This is 2012, so I guess it qualifies as the old stock at that point. It was new, it was unsold, complete, box, papers, the works. And then, to top it off, I mean, they basically said, well, we haven't been able to sell this thing, so we'll give you a discount on it. So I said, okay, thank you very much. I'll take it. I'm probably going to miss my flight, but please hurry up and wipe my card, and I need to run. But that's the story for me. So it's it sort of marks a significant turning point in my career, both getting out of the corporate side of things and going to do something I wanted, as well as picking up a personally significant piece. So it's one of those things where, to be honest with you, I don't wear it that often because it's not a very big case, and it's a very dressy piece. So you really have to have the right outfit to go with it. But when you put it on, it's a nice change of pace. I guess it's the opposite of Nicholas's watch, where you have something that's larger and dressier and is a counterpoint to the rest of the collection. I mean, in this case, this is really small and really dressy, which is the counterpoint to the rest of my collection and the watches that we make, which tend to be a little bit more a bit more universal in application in that sense. So yeah, it's I like to buy watches that we're not going to make ourselves. I mean, it's a tricky thing to try and do, because you have that freedom of creating pretty much whatever you want, but eventually you start defining your own design language and defining what your brand is, and what your brand represents. And there are certain things that you just can't do outside that. I mean, to be honest with you, I wouldn't have a clue how to design a rectangular watch. And it's not for want of trying. I think that GG with the Reverso has defined that category so well. There's certain watches that really define a category. This is one of them. I think it'd be very difficult to do a better job than that. So it's one of those pieces where you go, okay, I need to have one of those in my collection so that I can round out that that line which you can appreciate, but you also can't really do better with.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. I mean, I think it goes back to something Nick was saying about taking branding off watches and they're still being obvious what they are. I think
exactly.
The Reverso,
very good example of that.
And the Apple Watch, all three of those, I think, almost
guilty. I'm actually wearing one of those now.
Yeah, I did see it earlier on. I think it's the ratios. I think there's something to do with the ratios of each of those rectangles that is kind of specific, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyway,
well, talking about
amazing.
ratios, it's kind of a tricky thing to design. Can we have the next slide, please, Chris? It's a tricky thing to design because if you look at it, the hour hand is actually really, really short. And the minute hand is also really, really short, because if the time is, say, 1:05, it looks like nothing quite touches. I mean, the minute hand barely makes the minute chapter. It doesn't go to the edge of the dial. But yet, at, say, 3:15, it feels like the thing's too big. But those extremes are only for a short period of time. And the rest of the time, the dial actually feels surprisingly well balanced. And I think it's also because they chopped it up with that silver ring in the middle. I've actually owned a couple of Reversos. The other ones didn't feel quite as balanced because the dial was all the same color. It didn't have that sort of separation in the stepping.
Yeah, so you and I were talking when you sent these pictures over, and I confessed I have a Reverso Love watch that I also can't find in a condition that I'm prepared to accept it in, or a price that I want to pay. Sort of that balance of, like, there are some very nice watches for far too much money and some terrible ones, which are also far too expensive. But I really like the Shadow edition that they released around the same time as this, maybe slightly earlier, which has that dial contrast of it. Has, I think that's black and grey with white. So it pulls off that same trick of it always looks like the hands are kind of in the right place. I find with the ones that are all white or all silver, they're beautiful watches, but it doesn't quite do it for me. And like some of the heritage reissues, or is it the 1931 stuff that's out at the moment?
Yes, they're supposedly like heritage thin something, but they're not really that thin. I mean, I look at them in person, they actually feel quite large and slabby, because I think that the cases it's the proportions that are weird. The lugs are very long, and the strap they fit these days has this rigid insert, so it doesn't actually bend nicely. It sort of sticks out straight a little bit, and it only wants to bend at one angle, so it looks more like a cuff than a watch. It's hard to explain.
And I think they're bigger than the Grand Taille that was out of the same time as this. So it's sort of this classic design that is bigger than anything they ever made originally.
Yeah, I mean, they say, okay, it's 7.5 millimeters thick or whatever, with excluding the carriage, which is not that thin. I mean, I think this one squeaks in at under 7, and that includes the carriage at the back. So the watch part is really, really thin. I mean, it's very, very well made.
It's that duoplan movement, wasn't it, from the back from the old days?
Sorry?
Duoplan was the first of the movements in those watches.
Yes.
And I mean, if you look at ladies' watches and women's watches from a similar time and moving through the last 50 years, they've got a similar problem with hands as well, where you get those very small dials, and hands have to be even smaller. And I'm not even sure why you wear one, to be honest, because I can never read them when my wife's wearing a tiny little.
I think they jewelry.
Watch.
Honestly,
anyway,
I think they jewelry. I mean, if you look at the 101s that they reissued, like that jewelry 101 that has a tiny. Basically, it's got diamonds that are about that big, and the dial's about the same size.
I'll have one.
The minute and the hour hand are the same length.
But I'll have one.
I'll have one, yeah.
I absolutely.
Keep the rest. I just want the movement.
I recently finished reading a book about the history of the Cartier tank, and what's fascinating is how with all tanks, and also with the majority of the Reversos, when they put the track inside of the numerals, because you have to because of the hands. But I have to say, on this, I think the hands, yes, they're short, but they've got a really nice like width to them. You know, they're a bit wider than you normally would, I think, do. I mean, how does it? Are they filled with luminescent, or is it filled with like a sort of ivory?
No, they're luminescent, and the numbers are luminescent too, which is kind of.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So actually, quite easy to read then. Like,
it's very practical. It's very practical.
I'm now going to find myself hunting down the Grand Taille size of this and just being disappointed that I can't find one or can't afford one.
You might want to look at some of the others from around that era. I mean, I think in the early 2000s, Jaeger released a lot of interesting Reversos. There was the Shadow that you mentioned. There's this Latitude. They had one called the Memory, which was like a flyback secondhand quasi chronograph-ish thing. They had the Date with the pointer date thing and a couple of date windows. And then, there was that sort of like it or hate it Grand Sport line with the curved cases and the evolution of that. I actually had a Grand Sport chronograph, which has the same movement as the anniversary reissue thing which was in pink gold. I mean, that movement is technically amazing because you've got on the front side, you've got hours, minutes, seconds, date, chronograph, running, indicator, flag. And then when you flip it, you've got a retrograde 30-minute chronograph.
Exactly.
But that thing is a nightmare to service, and the service bill on mine was astronomical.
Yeah. I actually tried one of those at an auction house last year that was being sold as not quite working.
Yeah. And
tried this thing and I was like, given the watch that I'm going to show in a few minutes, this may seem a strange statement, but on me it felt huge. And then I can kind of understand why, because it's a bit of a funny watch. If you have it on the rubber thing, again, the rubber doesn't really bend. Yeah.
So I ended up buying the bracelet, which is again stupidly expensive, but the bracelet was a lot more comfortable. The case at the back is not flat. It's got this weird, I guess, convex. It's got this these two concave ribs that for some wrist types I think would fit quite comfortably if you've got a cylindrical wrist. I've got a wrist with a depression on the top, so actually it lands up sitting with this gap in the middle, and it looked pretty big. I ended up sewing it in the end.
It wasn't for me, and so I spoke to Ahmed, who's the boutique manager in London. He's like a really lovely guy. If you're ever having JLC fantasies and just want to go in and chat to somebody that will accept you and tolerate these fantasies and happily spend time talking to you, Ahmed is that man. And he went and got a service quote for me to fix the not quite working. I was like, no, out, done.
Talking about outrageous service quotes, I have a 1920s Jaeger desk clock as well. That's also sort of not quite working, but I think I paid 50 quid for it at a flea market in North London, and they came back with a quote. I want to say 2,500 to make the thing work properly. I said, you know what? At that point, I'll take my chances. So I got another one off eBay, cobbled the various parts together, and actually managed to make a working one. So I'm happy.
Success.
So the cost was like 140 quid, I think, and some tools.
Wow. Awesome. A couple of A couple of people have pointed out the JLC boutiques in Bond Street and New York both have walls of movements. So if people do want to go and see some of those old 101s or the duo plans or any of the new ones, they quite often have them on display.
Very cool.
Yeah, super cool. Any more questions, Matt, or should we slide on to the next thing?
I'm just going through duo plan, hand ratios. I think we've covered it all, to be honest.
Cool.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks, Ming.
Thank
so 2 weeks ago now, we announced that Matt was doing a competition to raise money for the charity Mind, and was going to be raffling off a piece of beautiful horological artwork by an artist called Anna Masters. And we have news, right, Matt? Do you want to?
We do. Thank you. Thanks to Team Watchnerd and everyone else who's very kindly donated to Mind over the last 10 days or so. I did say I was going to draw this on Monday, but given number one, we've raised the full £1,000, and two, we've got a live event, I thought I'd do it now. I may have glitched
That's
earlier.
gorgeous.
It's really cool, actually. It's a wooden frame with 3 rows of circles cut out of the frame and then fishing wire strung between them, and it's beautiful. Anyway,
That looks like my workbench after I make a mistake. But a lot more orderly. And she's got all the parts. I think I lost some. That's gorgeous.
My Zoom just cut out and restarted again, so I'm assuming I glitched at some point. I thought something might go wrong, so I actually rolled a random generator device before this to make sure I didn't have any problems. And the number that came up corresponds to a ticket bought by Richard Stenning. I don't know if if Mr. Stenning's on here.
Congratulations, Richard.
But Richard,
Congratulations.
I will be sending this. Well, I'll be asking Anna to send it out, but we will be packing it up and sending it out to you shortly. So congratulations.
Very, very cool. Congratulations. And obviously, thanks to everybody that gave their support. It's an amazingly good cause. It is a stunning piece of art, and congrats, Matt, on both some amazing fundraising and working with a fantastic artist like Anna. This is awesome.
Well, it's lovely to have so many people also interested in that Venn diagram of art and random bits of clocks and watches. So
Yeah.
thank you. And mental health, which is very important to us both, I know, and to a lot of other people.
Yeah.
I've just lost Ming on my video as well, so I've got no idea what's going on.
I have, but I think he might have taken himself off the video because he's also muted. But hopefully he'll come back. Should we on to the next?
Good. Tudor Black Bay Steel. So kind of bringing the tone down slightly into mass-produced watches. The Tudor Black Bay Steel. Tudor launched this, I think, 2017. Oh, Richard Stenning. Yes, you did hear that right. My Zoom was obviously glitchy. You have won.
It's not just yours.
You have won the square thing. Congratulations. Thank you. Oh yeah, good point. Ming's just typing it in. Even better.
Yep.
Right. So Tudor Black Bay Steel. I think this was Basel 2017, following the successful launch of the original Black Bay line. First photo. This is a 41mm. I mean, most of you will know this. 41mm dive watch, 200 meters with the MT 5612 caliber in there. That's Tudor's 70-hour power reserve movement, which actually is really cool. I hadn't realized quite how much I missed having a 70-hour power reserve, to be honest, until I got one. It does mean you can take it off on a Friday, pick it back up on a Monday, and it's still running. Many of us will have more than one watch, so we'll know the problems of taking automatics off their wrist for a while. Anyway, this is the Tudor Black Bay Steel. I bought it specifically for diving. I really wanted to take it underwater, and so I tested it out. Next slide. As you can see, it's quite a big watch, although the movement itself is relatively slim, not compared to the JLC, but relatively slim. There's a lot of gap there between the dial and the raised crystal on it. They call it domed, but actually there's this kind of step to it, more like a top hat than anything else. the hands are big and chunky. The loom plots look as though they should be fantastic underwater as well. So as a dive watch, I thought it would all hold together, to be honest. I thought it'd be fantastic to dive with. Next slide. This is as you can see, there's a very fine tooth to the bezel. It's not a huge chunky bezel. And actually, I don't know if you can see to the left of that picture, but it doesn't actually overhang the case at all, apart from between 11.1 and 5 and 7. So you have to turn it vertically. You cannot really grip it sideways. You've got to turn it between the lugs. And I must admit, I'm not sure about that for a dive watch. I think it makes it harder to use. Maybe it's my age, but I don't find it particularly easy to use. And certainly if I were wearing gloves, I think it would be even harder. Can we have the next slide? Again, that classic Tudor Rolex case shape. I think they did a good job here. I mean, it didn't go, when they blew up the original kind of case shape, they didn't go full on Rolex and turn it into some kind of squat beast. It has slightly curvier lines than the Rolex, but I think it looks pretty good, and that crown is nice, big, winds well. It's fantastic, actually. It's a good thing. And you can see there the top hat of the crystal, and the classic Tudor rose from I guess it was last used in the 50s and 60s, maybe a bit later. Next photo. So it is a big watch. It's 41 millimeters, but as you can see on the wrist, it sits really high on mine, probably on Ming's, probably not on Chris's. But it's a big watch. It's a good 14 mil, I think. So it's quite wobbly.
Is it better not on a NATO mat?
Yeah. So the reason I wear it on a NATO is because I find a NATO much easier to wear over a wetsuit.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And it kind of gives you a little bit of protection in that you could have a spring bar failure, and it should just about survive. I have had spring bar failures on other watches. I remember diving with a Bremel Supermarine 500 and was climbing up the side of the boat. And as I put my hand up, the watch fell straight off my wrist, and I caught it, which was nice. But these things do happen, and if they happen with watches that cost, I mean, this is what, $28.50, and the Bremel was probably a similar kind of price. You don't really want to lose £3,000 worth of watch to the sea. So I took it to Indonesia for a spot of diving. This is Halmahera in the Maluku Islands. So if you imagine going down from KL south onto towards Java, across onto Sulawesi, all the way up that wiggly X-shaped island, over the top to Manado, fly onto the next set of islands before getting to West Papua. That's where this is. So it's quite a long way, but the diving's lovely. We went there to try and see some epaulet sharks, a type of catfish or a shark that walks across the coral. As usual, I failed to see it. Anyway, next slide. And this is an action shot. So I think this kind of goes back to something I was saying earlier. Because of that big metal insert and the height of the crystal, it can be quite difficult to read. I don't find it that easy to read. The minute hand, when it was pointing to the bezel, was some way off. Now I know I don't really need to know the time, given I've got, as you can see in the top left of that photo, my dive time on my dive computer. But I do find it slightly annoying, and I hope maybe there's a slimmer version or something that's easier to read underwater, and a bezel that was easier to operate. But to be honest, if I were to buy these things again, I'd go for a Pelagos, which basically just is more expensive, but probably the better dive watch. So there we are. That's the Tudor Black-Bay Steel. You can see I've been under for 21 minutes, 21-ish minutes. You read across from the bezel pip on the left-hand side. Yeah, it's good. Awesome. Thank you very much.
You know what's going to happen if they make it thinner, right? you'll get a 150-meter water resistance, and then you won't be able to wash your hands with it, according to popular wisdom.
Exactly. To be honest,
It'll fall apart and condense.
You're right. I think the Pelagos is the one to go for. I mean, I think these are all right. They're great on leather and bracelet. Actually, they look much better topside on leather and bracelet, and they fit far better. But underwater, yeah, I probably should have gone for the titanium Pelagos.
I have a question, Matt. How does the fact that the bezel is an insert in stainless steel, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is then engraved and then filled with the black.
Yeah.
How does that work in comparison to the usual dive bezel, which would usually be a black with, you know, obviously a lume dot and then white numerals? Like, how do you find the contrast as someone who dives?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's one of those things where your eyes kind of work in different ways. So during the day, you look at this and the contrast is just about there. You know, I don't find it particularly easy to read, but it is there. At night, you don't care about the numbers because you're automatically kind of drawn to you're almost kind of drawn to the number of plots. So it is a strange thing in that diving with a watch that doesn't have loomed markers on the bezel means that you end up reading it in a different way. But I think that's why I do like, as you said, like a proper bezel that's got more than one spot on it, you know, because it makes it more in your face rather than having to think about how much time has elapsed.
We might have something for you very soon.
Awesome.
Heard it here first, folks.
That's the second exclusive on the show. So amazing.
I love the idea that this is maybe, because from your comment, Matt, that it potentially works better on topside than it does underwater, that this was potentially made with desk diving at the forefront rather than actual diving as a diving watch.
Or could it be like I mean, in the days in the time it was designed, I mean, this is obviously meant to be a reissue or a reinterpretation of a classic design. In the time it was designed, maybe this was whatever represented the best technology or the best understanding they had at that point. I mean, in that sense, it's a period diver rather than a diver made with today's understanding of how we read things in terms of visual hierarchy, in terms of, you know, some of the other luminous technologies we've got, things like that. I mean, maybe it's just a different watch from a different era in that sense.
It could. I think that's a really good point, and I think also, I mean, I've got the luxury of having been able to have dived with quite a few watches, and it may well be that it's a kind of a bias there of diving with, you know, big chunky Seikos and other things that kind of just has changed my mind as much as anything else. You know, I haven't. I mean, I know that there's some reviews that complain about the bezel being hard to turn, but I don't think anyone else is really bothered by it. Anyway, it's good. It's cool.
It is. Any questions from anybody that's not on the panel?
Well, Rob in Paris has said it's always slightly bothered him that the steel wasn't insert rather than a solid steel bezel, and it's a good point, and I think one that Nicholas just picked up as well. As you can see, it's the same bezel that they use for the one with the red, Harrods green, the blue, or the black. It's just a different insert. So steel on steel, yeah. At least it's not aluminium on steel, because then that would corrode. Or is it? Or is it? Who knows? There we are.
Another 20 years and you'll find out, I think.
Tropical
bezels. Yeah. Awesome. Chris, what did you bring?
Well, speaking of tropical things, and also gigantic, great big, chunky watches, I have brought along a second generation Omega Flightmaster, which has its origins in a dive watch, which is a little bit weird. So this is the watch as it looks today. This is the second generation. It has a caliber 911 movement inside of it, which is based off of the 861 that's used in Speedmasters. It adds a couple of modules. So this is the second iteration of the Flightmaster. This one removes the AM/PM indicator that would have been in the 9 o'clock subdial and puts a running second in. I believe the story goes that pilots who bought the first generation of this watch couldn't tell whether it was working. So it was deemed that a running seconds was probably more valuable than an AM/PM indicator. So that got dropped in. This has a slightly thicker case than the first generation, although it maintains the same level of water resistance of 6 atmospheres, I think, 60 atmospheres, 60 meters, 6 atmospheres. 6 atmospheres, there we go. It's 11.7 millimeters thick, and I have a couple of pictures that illustrate that. I've developing this reputation for myself as the guy that buys junk off the bottom of eBay.
Wait. 11.7. It's 12.
That can't be right.
It
That can't be right.
Yeah, 11.7 millimeters.
So this is larger. The new black bays are larger than Flightmaster.
Yeah. This is the third generation of this is like nearly 15 millimeters, so they get bigger. This is one of the thinner ones.
11 can't be right. I mean, I always thought they were something like a small volcano. You had altitude measured in feet.
Let me consult the small book of things. I'm pretty sure, unless I'm totally misreading numbers, but I'm fairly sure it says 11.7 mil for this case type.
Is that the book with all the other made up stuff in it?
It has some questionable statements in it about serial number ranges. And I say that because I read the thing about the serial number range. I questioned them, spoke to a couple of friends at Omega, and they said, don't worry about those. They might get changed in the future version. So I'm just not worrying. But
too bad Chuck Maddox isn't around to ask.
Exactly, right? So the first generation case band is a reference 145013 is 11 millimeters, excluding case back and glass, compared with 11.7 millimeters and 12.125 for a successive.
Excluding case back. That's a very
excluding case back. Yeah. So can we see it on the, yeah. Anyway,
So I'll show you in a sec. But so just for the reputation I have of buying junk off the bottom of eBay, I'm cementing further in place. So this is the watch as it appears now. It's been serviced. It had to have some. It had what was left of the loom in the GMT hand ground down, mixed up with paint, and put back in because there was not a lot left. But this is the condition I bought it in. And this was also the one picture on the internet of the watch in this condition. You can't tell if it's got any case graining. There is that kind of big hole in the GMT hand. There were no pictures of side profiles, none of the case back, none of the movement. It was a ridiculous thing to buy sight unseen on the internet.
You're a brave man, Matt. Sorry, Chris. You're a brave man.
Fake stick. So this was on eBay at a jeweler's in Oklahoma that specializes in used Rolex, and it said collection only. So that was the first stumbling block. Managed to convince them that they would ship it in the US. So I had a friend in the US who agreed to take receipt of it if I could do a deal with them, and they told me they knew nothing about it. A young lady had come into the store. She'd inherited it from, they weren't clear if it was her father or her grandfather, who had been a pilot and before that a test pilot. She'd inherited it, and immediately, the day she'd been given it, walked into the store and said, I want a date just with diamonds on the dial. What will you give me for this? So, ouch. Whereas some of us are very sentimental, others obviously not so much. And they put it up on eBay and just said, it appears to work. We haven't serviced it. It was, at the time, incredibly cheap for a Flightmaster. It still would be very, very cheap for a Flightmaster. I knew what I was getting in for, sort of worst case scenario. These are a Category 4 service in the world of Omega services, which is the worst kind or the most complicated kind.
Is that like a Category 4 Hurricane?
I was about to say, isn't that kind of hurricane? Yeah.
Kind of like that.
It's like a Category 4 hurricane, volcano, natural disaster, plague. Volcano, exactly.
Volcano. And I think where this comes from is you have the movement at base is an 861 out of the Speedmaster, so a 3-register chronograph, very straightforward. They've added a GMT complication, which to my mind is one of the nicest GMT complications that exists because it matches the hour hand, it just runs in another position. So you've got 2 very simple time zones to work with, and you adjust it off of a separate crown without needing to worry about it. And then it has an internal bezel that you turn. So it's got these extra bits of complication, some in the case, some in the movement. A watchmaker recently described it to me as a pain in the ass. But that's fine. So this is the watch as it came back to me from Swiss Time Services, who did the work on it. It has an aircraft on the back, which mentioned Chuck Maddox. in his write-up on these back in, I guess, the mid 2000s, he used the words, "It looks a bit like a DC-8 to me on the case back." And I posted, there was a conversation in a forum recently, and I was like, it doesn't look like a DC-8 to me. It looks like a Boeing. It's got this pylon coming out of the tail. On a crisp case back, you can see this front pylon coming out of the tail. So I don't think it is. And someone quoted another, a journalist's piece about this watch and said, there you go, it says it in whatever, it must be true. So I was like, I have a bit of the, like, someone on the internet is wrong, I can't go to sleep yet. So started looking around and found like a piece from Hodinkee, a piece from Time and Tide, a piece from whoever, and like 7 pieces of journalism from very well-respected watch blogs where they all said it's got a DC-8 on the back. And I was like, where is that coming from? And it all came from Chuck, because he'd said it looks kind of like, and they'd taken it as it absolutely is. Talking to a couple of other people, it's nothing. It's an amalgam of different aircraft that were around in the late 60s, early 70s, because Omega obviously didn't want to pay royalties for someone else's plane being on the back of their watch. So it uses bits and pieces of things that you'd see at the time. It has the wings off one thing, the body off another, the tail off a third. Someone pointed out on the Omega forums, it has no engines, so it probably wouldn't fly particularly well.
Exactly.
It's too long, isn't it?
It is.
Well, no. So it's if you a DC-8, and then there's a Super DC-8, and
Yeah.
I think that's why he
right.
said it looks like a DC-8, because there is a Super DC-8 that has that. It's about like a stretch version.
Because it's not right for a 707 if the tail does not the bit.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And but
But
the Super DC-8 did have that little extension piece in it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, it's an amalgam. But it's got, so there's some nice case brushing. The engraving on the back is very, very thin, so these wear off with time. As you can tell, this watch was not particularly well looked after. And I've in my watch collecting kind of illness, I've only ever had one watch case refinished. It was by Swiss Time Services. They did an amazing job. I got the watch back and I immediately fell out of love with it because it looked too nice. I just didn't want to wear it. It wasn't for me. So I learned my lesson, and I no longer do that to watches. I let them carry all their scars, and this has more than a few. So there's the profile of the case from the end. You can see this has still got some graining on it, along with lots of deep chunks out of the steel.
There is no way that's 11 millimeters thick.
Yeah, I'm with Ming.
It's like 11 feet, maybe.
Maybe it's 11.7 meters.
So, I mean, given the damage to the crystal when you first saw it, I mean, I'm surprised there aren't more dings around the edge of the top bezel, to be honest, because it looked like it had chips just about everywhere. I
mean, I don't know what you do to create that level of damage to a crystal and not damage the case, but whatever it was that happened to this watch, it's very, very well used. It has, so when I had this serviced, I'd fallen into the odd mindset of Speedmaster owners who don't change crowns because apparently crowns have value. I decided about 6 months later that was nonsense and had new crowns and pushers fitted because I wanted this thing to be water resistant and dust resistant so I could wear it and enjoy it. I have all the original crowns and bits before any obsessive collectors get upset. They are with the watch. If I ever sell it, which I won't, they're there. And so the color-coded pushers is to do with the chronograph. There's 2 versions of hands. One set's orange and one set is cadmium yellow. The yellow was originally meant to be for professional pilots, but at some point they just started throwing them on. Early on, you had to order them. The very, very first series of pushers in the first model, the narrower case, either had yellow or red. And then being sensible and having to scale their business, Omega just went bicolor pushers. You change the hands, it doesn't matter. You don't need to change the pushers. Very sensible. On the other side of the watch, you've got 2 more crowns. The black one is color coded to the internal bezel, so black bezel, black crown. The blue one is color coded to the GMT hand, hand, blue crown. Super simple.
Really like that simplicity. That is that's nice, so well designed. Yeah, it just does what it's meant to do.
Just make it work.
It's really good.
The dive watch connection to this, and the reason it is possibly as thick as it is, looking through Flightmaster only, is this was a collaboration between Lemania, a guy called Frederic Robert, and Omega, and I think HHI or S, it's not SSIH, whatever it was, the acronym that is now the Swatch Group, to build this watch. And he'd come from Aquastar, he'd made all the amazing Aquastar dive watches. He wanted to make this super water resistant chronograph. It didn't happen in the first 2 generations. The third one, which is extra thick, has a Kevlar set of seals in it. It's water resistant to 120 meters. I'd imagine if you press the pushers underwater, it wouldn't do it a lot of good. But there's kind of dive watch tech creeping into this weird pilot's chronograph. And then the last one is the bracelet. And the reason I'm taking this picture is this is not the bracelet you would expect with this watch. Sorry, Matt.
Just sorry, but you said obviously they got to 120 meters. Isn't that case design also similar to one of those prototype pre-Proplofs?
Yes. So the case design, so these pilot line cases, I'll go back a couple. These pilot line cases appear elsewhere. So you have the 120 meter Seamaster chronograph, which is nicknamed the Big Blue, which has got a thicker case than this. And that uses some of the tech that's in the 3rd generation of this watch. So the way the bezels, the way the gaskets are constructed, the way the crystals are fitted, are in that watch. And also there's a 1,000 meter, which came before the Ploprov, weirdly, which was, the idea was to make a watch for Comex, as I understand it. And there was some politics involved around Omega not wanting to make fully Comex branded dials, maybe. I don't know. You can get into some very intense internet arguments about those things, which I don't want to touch with anybody's barge pole of any description. So we shall say no more.
You don't need a barge pole when you're wearing a watch like that. Just point it at them.
Yeah, I mean, it's 11 meters thick, as we've discussed.
Exactly. You should be able to spatially distance yourself just by pointing your watch at people.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably.
It's quite useful then.
Yeah, I love these watches. These for me are like a weird and wonderful thing. I bought this in 2016, and I'd been lusting after them probably for about 10 years, and had the thing.
And you've got how many now?
4. There's a good reason for this. So I bought this one second. This is a 2nd generation. I managed to find a 1st generation. Last year I managed to find a 3rd generation, which is in a really nice condition. So I have 2 watches that were very well worn, one that was not worn and then was in a pawnbroker's, and then I have a watch that has been worn to death, which I may show on a future week show, but the very compressed version of that story is it belonged to a guy who was in the US military. He gave it to his son. His son wore it the original owner wore it in Vietnam, and it survived Vietnam. The son wore it in Desert Storm 1 and jumped out of a helicopter and immediately smashed the crowns off and filled it up with sand and water. So that's why I haven't fixed that one, kids. I mean, it needs everything. I'm probably not going to do anything to the case, but it needs the dial, bezel, hands, probably some big bits. We shall see. I mean, if you see me crying in about a year's time, you'll know why. The one I'd really like to have for sense of completeness, but I can't imagine ever getting my hands on, is the 18 karat gold version of the 2nd generation watch. They made somewhere between 100 and 200 estimated. They come up for sale occasionally for very reasonable amounts of money, like $30,000 to $60,000.
Presumably, depending on the price of gold at the time.
That doesn't seem to affect. Yeah. It seems to be condition of the watch that plays.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Given it's 11 meters thick, I would have thought, it's a lot of gold in
there. But yeah, I mean, for those, it's a condition piece. The kind of piece in A Journey Through Time, which was the museum book written in 2008, talks about members of the Saudi royal family famously buying some. I don't know how many some is, maybe all of them, who knows?
Probably. It's a big family.
Yeah, you see them in Italy occasionally come up for sale. There's a couple that have been through Christie's and Sotheby's. I kind of have this slight thought in my head that the ones that have gone through the big houses that have sold for good money are because people are drunk. And they're just like, that seems like a great idea. That's what I need. And bid on it. But, I'm not going to buy one of those. I'm not going to sell everything I own plus body organs to buy a gold flightmaster.
Right. And I think you're right so to do. Good. Well,
Any questions? I saw everyone laugh at something. So was there something in the chat I should know about?
We were
Yes.
just chatting about it's time for a plane, and then there was something about the is it plane
Crashing a
crash?
plane without an engine.
Plane crashes
Yeah.
and stuff.
Yeah.
I've got a question, Chris, about the typography they use on Flightmaster, because that's really 60s. That small letters, and is that the same across all three generations?
Yes. Yeah, they've all got the lowercase f for Flightmaster. But you're right that there is this kind of 60s lowercase font being used there, and then what feels like a very look to the future font for the bezel. Like the numbers on there feel so chunky. They're really similar to what you see on the Omega Olympic stopwatches from the period. So there's some like bits of DNA that kind of creep through, and fonts that get used in different places, and colours that get used in different places, like quite consistently. Like that type of sweep secondhand you find on things like chrono stops. There's the Ultraman, the Speedmaster, which there's a whole other argument about the sweep secondhand on those and people fitting them, whether they're even a real thing.
I mean, to be honest, when we talk about space watches, I know Speedmaster got there first, but this could so easily have been a space watch.
So this was a space watch.
So, I mean, like the space watch. I mean, look, it just looks spacey, whereas the Speedmaster just looks classic and iconic. I don't really, but this is like, as you said,
this looks so much more modern, doesn't it? This is there's something about this. It's just, it's so 60s, but also so forward-looking. So, and I think for me, like that, it's the colours, but also that typography. I'd love Lee's take on it on our watch. I'd love his take on the use of that, because it feels like they're really trying to push it forward, aren't they?
Yeah, Lee says it's sweet.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah,
that's the professional view.
It's sweet. Brilliant.
It's definitely a big change.
Technical term, so be sure to use that.
It's definitely a big change from the Moonwatch, and you see like Moonwatches have their hardcore following, and there's nothing wrong with that. Before anyone jumps down my throat over this, but they all look kind of the same. You know, are
the typefaces the same between the two subdials or the three subdials?
No.
They're all different, aren't they?
Yeah.
So even between 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, they're different. Obviously, the 12 hours is completely different, but
yeah. And there's variations of dials. So this is the Flightmaster only book is nowhere near as thick as the Speedmaster only book, and it contains a lot of history around the development. It talks about cosmonauts using these. Lenov very famously wore one. You have 3 different types of case. You have some different case backs, multiple iterations of dials and hands, and some movement changes. But these feel very different. You know, the Speedmaster have been around since 1957. The first ones of these came on the market in 68, 69. And as you said, it feels like a look to the future. It's the space race is on. We're going places, bright colours. And it's very much like a jet age watch. They didn't make tons of these. I think across all of the different movement types and all the models, it's something like less than 30,000, which over a 10-year-ish production run is not huge for someone like Omega at the time. But yeah, I love it. I'll probably show some more over the coming weeks because I'm fast running out of different watches.
It just sounds like an excuse to buy more.
Don't you start.
So let's just wrap up the questions. Can we have a specific question for Ming? Do you mind? Just one specific question. So Brian over in Ireland has asked, the crystal dial on the 1706 copper, was that designed to assist in charging the loom, or was it solely an aesthetic consideration?
Actually, it started off on the 1701s. We wanted to put it in as an aesthetic consideration to make the numerals look like they were floating, and basically that was the easiest way of doing it, rather than making a separate cutout dial, as on Nicholas's watch, for instance. So, in order to have numerals that look like they weren't attached to anything, we basically still need to have a support. We also wanted to reduce the parallax between the minute hand and the basically reduce the report height, so there's no parallax between the hour hand and the hour numerals. The sapphire ring and the numerals sit at the same height as the hour hand, and that actually helps bridge the gap between the dial surface and the report. So the report itself is thinner as well. I don't know whether it helps with the loom charging or not. Maybe it does, but it's an aesthetic thing that we've carried on. I don't know if we're going to carry it on, to be honest with you. We may or we may not. We've found some interesting ways of getting a similar, in fact, more interesting aesthetic than that. So we'll see.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Good.
I'm sitting here with my 1701 and even more appreciating the design choice and explanation. Nice, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Alan says, I can see the thread starting on Omega forums now.
This is because I accidentally said that all Speedmasters look the same.
No, I said that.
Oh, you said that. Oh, God, thank goodness for that. I thought I was the one who was going to be in trouble because I usually slag everyone.
I'm just going to round that out. So, yes, they are different, and I'm not going to tear down anyone's collecting journey or choices, but they are all of a similar type, and they have a fascinating story. There are variations in there. It's cool. Matt's doing this. No. I just think there are.
Stop digging. You don't. There's no need to dig.
Not digging. I think there's a lot of.
He hasn't reached 11 meters yet.
I think there's a lot of
poking out.
I think there are a lot of other interesting chronographs out there.
Thank you so much.
Let me finish. Let me finish you. So, like, I own Speedmasters. I think they're lovely watches. I just think there are other things as well. And what I kind of haven't touched on is, as far as like value for money, which is a weird sentence to say when you're talking about luxury goods that none of us need. As far as value for money, Flightmasters are amazing. Like, you have all of the technology that's in a Speedmaster. You have more water resistance. You have this fascinating case. There's another interesting story that goes with them, and then more tech. And typically, for one made in the same period as a Speedmaster, you are paying a third or less than a Speedmaster to get a Flightmaster. So if you're kind of like, if you like 70s chronographs anyway, and you're fascinated by aviation, they are another route that you can take, and it's a lot of watch for the money. So
it's a very good point.
That's me off my soapbox now.
Cool.
And we've lost Ming. Oh, he's back! Yay!
No, it's Zoom has been glitching all over.
Yeah, mine's been glitching too.
Sorry about that.
I think that's us done, right? I've talked about Flightmasters too much. I've upset Speedmaster fans.
There's one more question I thought, Matt. Did I see that pop up?
In the Q&A?
Yeah, in the Q&A.
It's a really broad question. Amblar has asked, why do you think there is a trend for modern watches to lack sharp case lines? So when he was looking at yours, Nicholas's, actually not yours, but thinking about Ming watches, thinking about Nicholas's, Garrick, etc. Yeah, there's a more fluidity maybe to some of the case designs. But I do think if you want it, you can still buy sharp edges.
Well, actually, I don't mind taking this one because we try. I think a lot of people have this preference for softer case lines because the edges are not as. I mean, maybe the edges are not as aggressive, and you don't run the risk of cutting yourself, whatever the case may be. A lot of the Rolexes on interior angles are very, very sharp. I mean, to the point that if you take the bracelet off and you put a strap on, it'll start shaving the strap. It's not easy to get crisp case lines without deviation, especially if you've got sharp right angles. We do it on some of our watches, but only in certain places, in places where you're not going to have that contact to wrist because it's not very comfortable. But generally, I think it's because it's not so easy to machine. And then there's a difference between crisp and sharp, and you just sort of want to be on that edge. And, it's the difference between a 10 micron tolerance and a 25 to 50 micron tolerance. And that's not so easy to do for a reasonable price.
That is a good point. Cheaper watches do feel sharper, don't they?
Or more rounded because they avoid having any sort of edges at all.
Yes, sorry, but when you were saying the difference between creating a knife edge and actually something you can wear, quite often you get that they go the wrong side of that as well. But then I guess it's all to do with the science and art of case design.
Yeah, cool. So I think we're all done. We've gone over, but that's cool. We're all
sorry.
Thank you to first to Nicholas and to Ming for
pleasure
bearing with us for rescheduling and coming and talking watches with us. Thanks to Matt for being an amazing co-host and for congratulations on the fantastic raffle. And to Richard sending on.
Well, Anna Masters is the artist who produced it.
Well done, Richard.
Well done, Richard. Yeah.
Thanks to everybody who bared with us from last week and joined us today. I mentioned it right at the beginning, but we're doing another one of these tomorrow. So if you're around tomorrow and fancy joining us, tomorrow is Bill Son and Robert Yan from Fratello. I'm not too worried about being told off over Speedmaster stuff because I know what the watches are tomorrow, and there's no Speedmasters. So if you want to come along tomorrow and hear Robert Yan talk about a watch that isn't a Speedmaster, get signed up. Thanks everybody. Have an amazing week. Stay safe. Look after each other. Take care.
Thanks, guys. Good night.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.